Hey, my name's Otis Gray, and you're listening to Sleepy, a podcast where I read old books to help you get to sleep. I'm recording from my family home in Vermont right now. It's fall, and I'm so happy to be bringing you this lovely tale tonight from one of my good friends and authors. And before we get to the bedtime reading, I just want to say that this episode is proudly sponsored by Shopify. If you have a business or you've been wanting to start your own business, Shopify helps you do your thing. Shopify is a global commerce platform that helps you at every stage of your business, from the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify helps you get there. Whether you're selling scented soap or handmade leather jackets, or maybe you're making podcasts like me. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Shopify helps you convert browsers online to real paying customers so you can sell more with less effort. As an entrepreneur myself, I crave anything that keeps my business running smoother so that I can do more of what I love, which is reading books to you. Well, Shopify helps people like me do just that, and they can help you too. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/Otis, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/OTIS to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/Otis. I'll put a link for this in the description of the show. And now, I get to profoundly thank all of our brand new patrons on patreon.com, which is a website where you can go and pledge a couple bucks for an ad-free version of Sleepy. So, this week's wonderful new patrons: Sherry, Bethany Kelly, Sarah, Michelle Hansen, Sarah Smith, Barbara Williams, Alex Dutler, Jan Graber, Leslie Maslow, Nikki Smith, Catherine Thornton, Eileen Halligan, and Laura M. Thank you all so much for donating and being a part of making Sleepy. It really means a lot. And for any of you who don't know, these names that I just read are brand new supporters of Sleepy on patreon.com, which is a website that allows you to directly support the people who make the stuff they like. So, if you like Sleepy and you want to be a part of making the show and hear your name read on the opening credits of it, just go to patreon.com/sleepyradio. Thank you. And as always, the music you're hearing is by my good friend James Lepkowski, and the cover art for Sleepy is by Gracie Kanan. Well, tonight, in honor of this wonderful fall season that we have in swing now, we're about to be in spooky October, actually, which means more spooky stories for you, or more Halloween themed. I look forward to it every year. And I feel like tonight's story is a perfect transition into that month of sleepy readings. And that is The Lumberjack's Dove by Jenna Rose Nethercott. Longtime listeners of the show will remember me reading this and will know that I am good friends with Jenna Rose Nethercott. She is one of my favorite people. Such an unbelievably talented author. She wrote this short poem called Lumberjack's Dove, and then she wrote Thistlefoot, which was very widely acclaimed. It is so good. And then she wrote 50 Beasts to Break Your Heart. All these are incredible. I highly recommend just going and reading and buying all of them if you haven't already. But this story in particular is outstandingly beautiful and one that is fantastic to fall asleep to. So without further ado, The Lumberjack's Dove by Jenna Rose Nethercott. And now is the time for you to fluff up your pillow just how you like it. Feel yourself melt into your bed. Get real comfortable. Close your eyes and let me read to you.
Part 1. It's the same old story. A lumberjack loses a hand to his own axe. The hand becomes a dove. The hand tries to fly away, but the lumberjack catches it beneath his shoe. You know this story. The lumberjack ties one end of a string to the hand and the other end to his belt. Then the lumberjack walks out of the forest, the airborne hand fluttering along behind. There are 3 rules of storytelling. 1. Only tell a story if you have to. If you can survive without telling it, keep mum. 2. A story is a two-way mirror. Don't think the characters cannot see you. It's safest to assume they can always see you, and they know exactly where you live. 3. The purest way to speak truth is by lying. Slow it down. This is how a hand morphs as it abandons the limb. First, carpal bones lose their weight. Fingers hollow into piccolos. Next, lumbricals twist and reform. The ulnar nerve and radial artery elongate through the bottom of the wrist. Elbow bend and harden. Grow talons. The thumb sheds from flesh to bone, bone to beak, carves into point and split. Feathers bristle up from skin, an afterthought. Now for the hard part. Flight, O wild ghost, anti-burial. Tendons weave into fans, delicate, so easy to tangle. Uncurl from palm into wings, all wet and spooked by newness. Watch them discover their strength, accordioning until the new body, severed from the old body, lifts itself into the air and flies towards a nearby branch. Lumberjack clutches the absent space at the end of his arm. He looks up at the dove, who in turn looks back at him, already forgetting it was ever anything but sovereign. Stories are best in 3s. Lumberjack, the abandoned, and the abandoner. Axe, means of abandonment. No matter who you are, all you are ever doing is leaving or being left, or acting as the impetus to leave. Again and again and again. This is every story. This is the Trinity. It's a betrayal, really. A man is born with this body. Everyone tells him it's his. They call it by his name. They pet this body and clothe this body and teach him that this body, it's with him forever. A portrait. Arms twinned in blue flannel, rolled to the elbow. Blue veins like garter snakes. Freckles dusting the collarbone and nose and throat. Pink scar check-marked on the upper lip from a BB gun misfire. Rag in the back pocket. A firm sense of direction. A restlessness. Lumberjack starts his pickup truck. He keeps the windows closed as he drives and the dove floats up to bounce against the glass. The road is slick with rain. Worms boil up from the earth. Now, there's a shirt tied around the wound, the fabric growing sticky and dark with ache. A bootlace becomes a tourniquet. A terrible yank settles in the basement of his heart, the lowest stair. Some men have a gift for controlling which way a tree will fall. They spit snuff into undergrowth to interpret like tea leaves. They light brush fires just to speak to the smoke. When a trunk drops, it could almost be mistaken for bowing. When axe and lumberjack touch, whole forests die for them. Axe has loved often, and by loved, I mean she has cleaved many pieces off many bodies. Lumberjack drives towards the witch doctor, or he drives to the ER, depending on who's telling the story, and depending on if the storyteller is a liar. In the truck bed, Axe watches the sky peel towards dusk. Onward, they drive and drive and drive. Part 2. In the version of the story where a lumberjack goes to the ER, a receptionist asks him to fill out a form with his name. He writes down all of them, one for every telling. Hospital inpatient form. Reason for visit. My hand is trying to fly. Something separated my hand and myself, and now I want to reclaim what is mine. I want myself reunited with myself. I want my hand to shrivel without me. I want. Remember, there are infinite stories about separation. By infinite stories, that is to say that there is this story and only this story, told many different ways. Sometimes the hand is not a hand, but a sweetheart or a daughter or a house on fire. Anything can be part of oneself, and anything can be taken away. Sometimes the truck is a fishing boat, or a Boeing 747, or a blocked telephone number. Sometimes the abandoned never makes it free of the forest. Quick, go to the blue chairs and the wall poster of a skeleton. Stacks of flyers. Quit smoking today. You and your pregnancy. Living with arthritis. Names and dates and numbers on a form don't matter when your hand is affixed by a piece of twine. Details can come later. Posters of skeletons are far less motivational than actual skeletons. When it comes to heating a color Xerox or heating the dead always win. The dead win every game they ever play. There is only one other patient in the waiting room. She is mostly bald, with a few bright patches stealing up from the scalp. I cut it all off, she says, but it was a mistake. Will the doctor stitch it back on? Asks Lumberjack. He knows little of what doctors can and cannot do. He knows little of the rules of removal and replacement. The woman pets the mass of her own hair piled in her lap. It growls, nips at her thumb. Once a part of the body is removed, it belongs to itself. Her head catches light like a new sun. The hair in her lap smolders like underbrush burned to clear a work site. She's beautiful. She looks like she was just born, but not for the first time. Later, the woman was called in hours ago and hasn't come out yet. Maybe this is a good sign. Maybe this is a terrible sign. The dove is asleep on Lumberjack's shoulders. Little breaths. He wonders where his hand found its own pair of lungs, its own tongue, its own plumage, its own tiny heart, shivering like a water droplet about to release the spigot. Simple tasks bring leaks when your grip is winged. A bottle shatters in its journey to the mouth, Handwriting adopts wide swoops as if caught on a thermal. It becomes impossible to trace the map of a darling's skin, or dial the telephone, or hold a soup spoon. Instead, your hand will preen by the open window, lift out of reach, abandon the duties for which it was built. Here, read an old issue of Highlights magazine. Read Woman's Day, 60 ways to bake a quiche, 55 new ab workouts, 23 spells to make your lovers bow to you, 30 their knees, call you mighty, 10 sigils to etch into the sand, 4 ways to live forever. You will live forever. You will live forever. Part 3. In the version of the story in which the wounded man goes to the witch doctor, he drives for 3 full days and nights. He cauterizes the wound with the truck's cigarette lighter. He runs out of gas, but somehow the truck keeps on going. Like all major U.S. highways, I-91 functions as a direct trail to the witch doctor. All you have to do is drive straight. You can tell you are near when the radio static is replaced with bird calls. 10 miles to go. The truck windows lick with cracks like a river map. 7. Rust bubbles along the undercarriage. 6 miles. The rear left tire sprouts a puncture, leaving air to wail free like a spirit fleeing a corpse. 4 3/4 miles from the witch doctor, and the engine sprints into flames. The doors are drawn and quartered from the sockets. 3 crows land on the hood and dip their beaks into the oil tank, as if drinking from a stream bed. When you enter unknown territory with only one hand, choices must be made. Leave it open and ready to catch, or carry a weapon. Lumberjack pulls axe from the truck bed and into his surviving hand. He may need her. Many people think of axe as beautiful. There must be some allure to danger. They love her in that golden way reserved for the untrustworthy. When she dissembles them, they almost seem grateful. All men want is to love someone with better things to do than love them back. The blade, shark fin and steel, wedging from thin to fat like a pie slice, shine on a shirt tail until light twists like a funhouse mirror. Expect to see axe, but instead find your own reflection. Funny the unexpected places you appear, in a tool, a bird, a storyteller's throat. It is important to note that Lumberjack lost his dominant right hand. Curiosity is a terrible elixir, a love potion, enough to make a man drink, to prompt him to swing an axe with his weaker fist, just for the sport of it. The foreman often chastised him for these experiments, but it only takes one mistake, one folly. The weak becomes the only. Now the left hand carries axe along the road. To wield a weapon in a clumsy limb is not an exercise in protection. It is an exercise in feeling less alone. The dove has no choice but to follow. There is nowhere to go but forward. The horizon swallows the highway. Tarmac stretches onwards, flat and straight and blistered with sun. On either side of the road, barbed wire is nailed between wood posts. Atop each post is an animal skull. There are hundreds of posts and hundreds of skulls. Rabbit, gull, deer, bull. Then the unrecognizable, one with black antlers webbing from cheekbones, another with an eye socket in the center of the forehead, another with no mouth. A mouthless jaw implies the following. A, the creature did not eat. B, the creature did eat, but nothing that could be ingested traditionally. Not the sort of food one can touch. C, the creature had a mouth once, which at some point the witch took away. And at once, a house, there in the cornfield just 20 yards away. It is avoiding shadow in a most curious manner. It ripples the way heat ripples against desert. Roof alive with prairie grass and sod, stained glass windows. The house squats on 7 wooden legs, knee-bent and spidered. A rope ladder uncurls like a fern. Bone chimes hang above the door and sing, though there is no wind. Crows blacken the ground in front of the house. The dove is a pinprick in the center of a great dark pupil. It is the only star alive. Can corn go on forever? Can a house be alive? Can a life be a house? Approach. How do you climb a rope ladder with a single hand? Approach. Stop asking questions and expecting answers. There are 3 rules of storytelling. 1. Be careful what stories you tell. 2. All stories told will manifest and become real. 3. Sometimes a story doesn't make sense. Sometimes it will contradict itself, but be true anyway. On the precipice, the dove won't stop beating itself against the door. 6, 7, 8, 9. Muscle memory. This was its duty once. The knocking. 12, 13. Some knowing is left. Some notion of what came before. 15, 16, 17. Memory. Colliding with the same barriers repeatedly and demanding different results. Or no, that's insanity. No, it is certainly both. The door opens. So Lumberjack enters. He enters the house the way he might enter a woman, driven by a need to be made whole. This is the part of the telling when the storyteller pauses. You remember your grandmother or your sister's best friend or the bus driver quieting and turning away. Your grandmother gets a glass of water. Your sister's best friend decides to put on a cooler dress, and you watch her change in the corner, peripherally. The bus driver unwraps a piece of big red chewing gum. Sun catches on the paper, silver like a fish. Suspense. You're a mantis caught beneath a cup. You powerless thing. Part 4. A pause in the story is not a chance for you to rest. There is no rest. It is simply a turning of the head towards another possible outcome, happening simultaneously and constantly. The story is always being told somewhere. At the hospital, Lumberjack is still waiting and still bleeding. The dove begins to mince magazines in its beak. It gathers the bits into a pile. So far, it has accrued a heap of 12 shredded tabloids. The dove starts to pluck at a tatter on the upholstery. "Stop that," Lumberjack says, and startles. He is talking to part of himself. That can't be right. If you speak to a bird, and that bird is capable of listening, it must be its own part, and not a part of the speaker's body. Body parts cannot listen. They cannot collect fabric scraps because they have no motive of their own. The dove ignores the demand. It weaves thread into magazine clippings. It dampens the paper with filtered water from the cooler and begins to mold. First, it uses its feet to pluck the collection into a mound. Then it settles its body into the small hill, tamping the center down into a bowl. The dove is building a nest. A portrait, fragile, lace-like, loose enough for light to pass through. Better hold breath to avoid scattering. Mottled with stray down and red ringlets, swirled like a hurricane, quiet as the storm's eye. Lumberjack considers kicking it to show the dove who's in charge. But oh, there is some lovely music to it. It's more intricate than anything he ever could have built. In a moment, the delay will end. We will leave the magazines and pamphlets and water cooler behind. We will enter the doctor's office. Some fate or another will present itself. But for now, time is distracted. It is examining a dove's nest on an emergency waiting room floor. Time does this sometimes. Pauses to appreciate an object of beauty. It grows so enamored that it forgets to move forward. A meadow or a clavicle or a painting might be the secret to immortality. Enough loveliness, and time will stop altogether. The doctor will see you now. The dove is curled in its nest. Just a tug on the twine would evict the bird. Lumberjack does not do this. Instead, he slips his good hand beneath the little home and lifts it. He holds it like a newborn, close to his body, as he follows a nurse into the operating room. Today, home is a thing he can hold, as long as he doesn't hold too tight. A place that balances in an open hand. This will not happen again. Home is not in the habit of repeating itself. This is how it goes. Wait, then wait, and wait, and nothing happens. And then all of a sudden, the whole hospital is singing. The surgical technician wraps the dove with moistured gauze and floats it in a plastic bag of ice water. The anesthesiologist inserts an intravenous line. Lumberjack is alone in the forest. Trees are telling him to sleep. The doe finds a bullet in her belly. A red-tailed hawk coughs up a cradle of bones. Anesthetics discover the brain. The man on the operating table remembers even less of his name now. He is sawdust in the wind. If he has a name, it doesn't matter. A name is a name is a name. A lover is a lover, is a prize, is a story. Every time the storyteller says the word lover, replace it with the word self. The word self replaced with lover. Dizzying, isn't it? When vertigo sets in, plant saplings. Replace lover with cedar or dogwood. Replace self with poplar or sugar maple. Keep swapping out words until no one is left but the forest. The dove rattles its body against gauze. They can see its nest, there in the crook of the sleeping man's elbow. It needs the nest back. 1, 2, 3. It bats against the inside of the plastic bag. 4, 5. Knock, knock, knock. Its home is in someone else's arms. 6, 7, 8. Grip slacks with sleep and the nest falls. 9, 10. The bag punctures at beak point. Water flows out in ribbons. Living creatures believe they own something as soon as they love it. They refuse to believe otherwise, no matter how many times a beloved vanishes. The surgeon needs to know now. Can the hand be saved? So the technician unwraps the dove, cool and silvered with a wet wingtip sagged, its eyes galaxies, its heart a landmine. The dove's wings are spread open by blue rubber gloves. It is laid on its back. Tackboard slides beneath it. Then with 2 soft pops, one through each wing, it is stapled to the table. I'll make this quick and honest. The surgeon inserts a scalpel into the dove's trachea and slits down towards the pelvis. The dove's stomach grins open. Its lungs go dark. It wants for nothing. Back in the truck bed, Axe feels a shift. It begins to snow. The snow falls directly onto the truck and nowhere else in the parking lot. The snow is not snow. The snowflakes are feathers and they are falling faster. They fill the truck bed until Axe is buried and gone and reaching up for a surface she cannot touch. If the surgeon expected to find a hand within the bird, still intact, he was disappointed. He should have known that not everything is a mask or a box containing something else. Some things just are. The primary surgeon, the technician, and the anesthesiologist do not read entrails to divine the future. Medical practitioners are not trained in haruspicy. Had they been, the liver would stretch and squeeze like a concertina. It would sing aloud their descendants' name and count their freckles and scars and mimic their voices. It would tell how the descendants' lives would end, in passenger seats, in factories, on operating tables, not unlike this one. Both the surgeon, the technician, and the anesthesiologist are sworn to science. The liver stays silent. All they have is a dead bird pinned to a tabletop. The gizzard, small intestine, pancreas, crop, heart, buccal cavity, esophagus, and just past the ribs, an egg. Tiny egg, pallid and smooth, tight as a dime. Little pill, little light bulb, translucent with incompletion, not yet ready for laying. It is the centerpiece on a splayed altar. When the patient awakens, pain electrifies his arm. He looks at the hand, but the hand is not there. Skin is stretched over bone and stitched in place. Pain floats outside the body, just beyond the wrist. It is a haunted pain, built not of what is, but of what should be. Then he sees the dove, flayed like a satsuma. His hand is never coming back. We leave the operating room. Here are pamphlets on how to care for the stump as it heals. In the bag with the pamphlets or a tube of antibacterial jelly, 50 yards of gauze, and a bottle of painkillers. The surgeon apologizes that more could not be done. Take this, an open shoebox, and within the shoebox is the nest, and within the nest is the egg, alive and brittle and holy as a new planet. This story was written a long, long time ago, before car keys or replantation surgery or radios were invented. It was written for you, and it was written by generations before your birth. A story as true as this tosses time over its shoulder like a fistful of salt. A story as true as this knows what is to come. Part 5. The witch doctor cut her and count 100 tree rings. Then the light shifts, and she is 22 and beautiful. Hair of razor wire and ivy, braided in a wreath. Fingernails sharpened to points. She will unwrap a person with an index finger and tinker. She, a clocksmith, the patient, a pocket watch. Lumberjack leans axe against the wall, proof that loyalty is easy to put aside. Simply set it down and walk away toward someone new. He grabs a dove from air like a peach from a branch and slams it down on the tabletop. Fix it. He is arrogant because he thinks he is owed a lot. Maybe he is. Maybe he isn't. It's difficult to say what any one person is entitled to. The bird squirms against the table. Its little pulse is throbbing. Let go, let go, let go. Never, thinks Lumberjack. Never. I will never let you go. I will never let you go. The witch puts a kettle on to boil. She stirs nightshade into a china cup and lets it steep. Takes a sip. Everything has the ability to help or harm, depending on how it's used and how thirsty you are when you swallow it. Her pupils, hollow as a chapel, black as plums. To be a proper house guest, you must never leave your clothes around the house. You mustn't give gin to the cat. Avoid bleeding on the furniture. If possible, do not touch the furniture at all. Do not touch the floor or walls. Leave no marks. No stray hair on a pillowcase. No breath condensing on window panes. Take up no space. Never let the hostess know you are there. This assures that when you leave, you do not leave a gap. The cruelest act a person can commit is to leave a gap. We've been waiting for 7 years, or 5 minutes, or not at all, or 3 days, or have watched Western civilization rise and fall on the television in the corner. There are 3 rules of storytelling. 1. Stories don't care about your prior appointments. They make their own schedule. They are not service-minded. If a story doesn't make you wait, it isn't worth a damn. 2. Every story is about you. 3. Never ask a story for answers, or it will swallow you alive in punishment. All right, says the witch doctor. Let me have a look. And Lumberjack holds out his stump, and she unwraps the fabric around it and pours bourbon on the wound, and the wounded hisses into steam and returns to his body. and now the stump is clean and raw and ready. Most storytellers aren't sure where to go from here because none of them have met a witch doctor. In general, storytellers stick to what they know. The witch doctor is largely unknowable because when you look at her, she seems to scatter and reform. She's only clear in periphery, so the storyteller improvises, says something like this, and the witch doctor spreads a thistle salve across the dove's back, and the dove becomes a hand again. Or she gives the dove a thimble of blood to swallow. The dove becomes a hand again. Or she licks the stump, which sprouts new palm, fingertips, bone. This telling is not like the others. I know the witch doctor. Other storytellers are charlatans and not to be trusted. Watch your wallet and your keys around them. Watch your quiet heart. This is how it happened. Now, show me your good hand. He holds it out. The witch doctor sets a sewing needle to flesh. Along his lifeline, she stitches stream beds gone dry. Thread becomes woodlands. Seeds are buried and saplings embroider up towards the sun. Boys are born among the silk. They learn to hold weapons and to unbutton a dress in the dark, and they learn to hew the forest at the waist. They learn to claim what may or may not be theirs to claim. The witch doctor sews and sews, and as she does, forests and boys rise and fall. Reclamation spell. Ingredients: 1 wooden bowl, 1 copper bowl, 1 clay bowl, the abandoned, the abandoner, the means of abandonment, 3 matches and a strike pad, an incantation. The witch plucks a tail feather from the dove, scrapes a splinter off axe with a paring knife, takes up lumberjack's sewn hand. Each she places in one of the bowls. She drops a lit match on all 3. A quick singe. Incantations can be written on diner napkins, sheepskin parchment, envelopes, in the margins of instructional manuals, or in the dust on a back windshield. The words vary. Could be a poem or an address, could be a hymnal. This incantation is a number. 108.0. 108.0. A morning dove's average body temperature. Peak human body temperature before death. A radio coordinate. The radio switches itself on. Axe wakes up in the corner. Her favorite folk song is playing. When they were partners, Lumberjack would sing it as he seized her body. She would collide with the tree in time to the rhythm. At the height of the chorus, her darling's voice would rise, and then, in clean harmony, the log would split open like a mouth. Come, all you shanty boys, take up the hatchet blade, and as you lay the woodlands low, sing out this serenade. Hemlocks do not die with ease, but stumble out of life, like drunkards dragging off their boots to bed beside their wives. There is a changing moment when the spirit is set free, when a man becomes a body, and when wood replaces tree. Oh, shanty boys with axes high, you know this instant well. For you alone have felled the trunks and watched the sap dispel. Yes, you alone have seen the way leviathans may fall and rot upon the forest floor, as one day will we all. Axe is up and dancing. She is boogieing around the house, knocking over pots and dishes, scuffing up the floorboards, leaving splinters. She is crooning along, and her blade is glowing red hot. My, oh my, what a song, what a song, what a time it was. Remember, remember, the way the trees bowed to us. They must have really loved us to the point of dying. When she runs to Lumberjack and grabs his only hand and pulls it to her with a thwack. A clean cut. It's the same old story. A lumberjack loses a hand to his own axe. You know the story. The hand does not become a dove. It does not become anything but severed. The hand lies in a clay bowl until someone drops a lit match on it, and it turns to ash. Meanwhile, the dove nuzzles against the right stump where it once belonged. Slow it down. This is how a hand returns to the arm. First, wings retract into shoulder. The urge for flight brushes loose like dust. Feathers molt. Then vertebrae stretch into finger bones. Knuckles bulge and crack. The beak softens, twists into thumbprint. Next, the belly fuses with wrist. Calluses return to the palm. All is as it was. Sacrifice is a requirement, but the world rests on a Libra scale. For new saplings to root, others must fall. To walk towards one home, you must turn on another. To nurture the right hand, you must neglect the left. Lumberjack doesn't rejoice. All he can feel is the new screech on his left arm. A sudden absence. He doesn't care that all he begged for is returned. He doesn't thank the witch doctor. It is not until later, as he walks down the highway back to his pickup, axe pinned under his arm, that he notices something new in his closed fist, firm and warm. An egg. Part 6. You probably have a favorite version of the story. When you first heard it many years ago, you knew right away which of the two you believed. As you aged, your trust redirected whenever you met a milestone. The first time you hurt another person, the first time you were drunk, the moment you bought a plane ticket away, the last time you glimpsed yourself in a mirror or a blade. You can't recall which version you started with. This is where the two reconverge. Lumberjack drives back towards the woodlands. He stops to fill the tank at a gas station off exit 17 and fumbles with the nozzle. There are many simple maneuvers to relearn. Twisting the gas cap, extracting his wallet, pulling the trigger. Gasoline thickens the air, and for a moment, he forgets to mourn. He drives and drives and drives. He puts the egg in the ashtray, where it won't break. It must be lovely in there, he thinks. No light, no sound, just musk and the notion of speed. Axe doesn't believe in folk tales. She believes in her own precision. The wind casts acorns and leaves into the pickup bed. I tell you, your father had a love X sings to them. And by love, I mean to be felled, sliced to lumber, and reassembled into a new body. She isn't sure what she means when she says this, but it feels like the truth. Lumberjack parks at the forest edge. He transfers the egg to his pocket and walks into the woods. Eventually, he makes his way to a tree with a gash in the side, an incomplete job. The bark is black with blood, a trail marker, a memory. There are 3 rules of storytelling. 1. All stories end with a beginning. 2. Every character is a shapeshifter. Every object is a seed. 3. The purest way to speak truth is by lying. Lumberjack digs a hole at the trunk's base, 3 inches wide and 6 inches deep. Then he cares for the egg the only way he knows how. He plants it. What is truth? Here, you are holding an axe head, polished as a looking glass. Your cheek is familiar in the strange silver light. Your brow, your lip, your heart. It is not really you, of course, only a reflection. And yet, were the mirror untrue, you would not recognize this reflection as your own. So, too, functions a story. Wait 3 days and 3 nights. Dampen the soil. Feed it river water. Tell it fables, those of crows and forgiveness, of beautiful women once known, of letters sent and received. All night, the moon grants amnesty. Wolves do not tarry for prey. The forest spits shadows at other loggermen to draw them into labyrinths. The sycamore breathes in and out 40 times, and then, at last, comes dawn. A hemlock tree has grown from the egg. Red paint flickers along the bark. Gold thread and newsprint bud the branches. Silhouetted against the morning sky, each bough is heavy, so bountiful as to drag towards the ground, fat with the most peculiar fruit. A portrait, hung from the bough like ripe peaches, 5-fingered and reaching. The hands grow in clusters, one upon the next. Soft in their newness, no callus, no splinter, no burn. Opening and closing, clasping each other, widening palms to catch beginning rain. Oh, there is so much to hold. When you discover an ending to this story, it will not be on the lips of a storyteller. I have no lock for this door. You may come upon it in a rain gutter or a pulled tooth gap. You may find it in an aviary. You may glimpse it in your headlights on a midnight highway. A shadow, an atlas, a skeleton key. Like a sweetheart, some stories leave you without telling you why. Such is the case for this one. Of course, you knew this was coming. You knew this story better than your own.
Hey, my name's Otis Gray, and you're listening to Sleepy. A podcast where I read old books to help you get to sleep. And this is another spooky October episode for you. I'm so happy tonight to bring you a classic spooky tale.
that of Sweeney Todd, the original story that Sweeney Todd was featured in. It's a real delight, perfect for the season. And before we get to the bedtime reading, I just want to thank all of our brand new patrons on patreon.com, which is a website where you can go and pledge a couple bucks for an ad-free version of Sleepy. So, this week's amazing new patrons: Jesse Charette, Michelle, Brahm Hannah, Greg Mashburn, Kathy Rooney, Martha, Holly, Jill, Melissa, and Marina. Thank you all so much for being patrons of this show. It really, really means a lot. And for those of you who don't know, these names that I just read are brand new patrons of Sleepy on patreon.com, which is a website where you can go and pledge a couple bucks for an ad-free version of the show. So, if you like Sleepy and you want to be a part of making it and get cool perks in return, including having your name read on the show, just go to patreon.com/sleepyradio. Thank you. And as always, the music you're hearing is by my good friend James Lepkowski, and the cover art for Sleepy is by Gracie Kanan. Tonight, as I said, we're going to be reading the story of Sweeney Todd. Now, Sweeney Todd, we know you've heard of Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street. That's played by Johnny Depp, and there's musicals, and the story of the demon barber of Fleet Street and Sweeney Todd was originally published in a penny dreadful way back in the day in London, and the story was actually called The String of Pearls, or The Barber of Fleet Street, also titled as A Domestic Romance. But this is the story of Sweeney Todd, and it was published by E. Floyd on Fleet Street in London way back in the day. And this is just a really, really well-told story. Reads very well out loud. It's very spooky, but the writing and the descriptions are pretty incredible. This is definitely a long series that I would love to read in full at some point on my own, because it's just wonderful. But for tonight, for spooky October, I hope that you can sleep soundly or enjoy in whatever way you'd like The String of Pearls, The Barber of Fleet Street, the story of Sweeney Todd. And now is the time for you to fluff up your pillow just how you like it. Feel yourself melt into your bed. Get real comfortable. Close your eyes and let me read to you. Chapter 1. A Strange Customer at Sweeney Todd's. Before Fleet Street had reached its present importance, and when George III was young, and the two figures who used to strike the chimes at old St. Dunstan's church were all in their glory, being a great impediment to errand boys on their progress and a matter of gaping curiosity to country people, there stood close to the sacred edifice a small barber's shop, which was kept by a man of the name of Sweeney Todd. How it was that he came by the name of Sweeney as a Christian appellation, we are at a loss to conceive, but such was his name, as might be seen in extremely corpulent yellow letters over his shop window by any who chose there to look for it. Barbers by that time in Fleet Street had not become fashionable, and no more dreamt of calling themselves artists than of taking the Tower by storm. Moreover, they were not, as they are now, constantly slaughtering fine fat beards, and yet
Somehow people had hair on their heads just the same as they have at present, without the aid of the unctuous auxiliary. Moreover, Sweeney Todd, in common with those really primitive sort of times, did not think it at all necessary to have any waxen effigies of humanity in his window. There was no languishing young lady over the left shoulder in order that a profusion of auburn tresses might repose upon her lily neck, and great conquerors and great statesmen were not then, as they are now, held up to public ridicule with dabs of rouge upon their cheeks, a quantity of gunpowder scattered in for beard, and some bristles sticking on end for eyebrows. No, Sweeney Todd was a barber of the old school, and he never thought of glorifying himself on account of any extraneous circumstance. If he had lived in Henry VIII's palace, it would be all the same as Henry VIII's dog kennel, and they would scarcely have believed human nature to be so green as to pay an extra sixpence to be shaven and shorn in any particular locality. A long pole painted white, with a red stripe curling spirally around it, projected into the street from his doorway, and on one of the panes of glass in his window was presented the following couplet: "Easy shaving for a penny, as good as you will find any." We do not put these lines forth as a specimen of the poetry of the age. They may have been the production of some young Templar. But if they were a little wanting in poetic fire, that was amply made up by the clear and precise manner in which they set forth what they intended. The barber himself was a long, low-jointed, ill-put-together sort of fellow, with an immense mouth, and such huge hands and feet that he was, in his way, quite a natural curiosity. And what was more wonderful, considering his trade, there never was seen such a head of hair as Sweeney Todd's. We know not what to compare it to. Probably it came nearest to what one might suppose to be an appearance of a thick-set hedge, in which a quantity of small wire had got entangled. In truth, it was a most terrific head of hair, and as Sweeney Todd kept all his combs in it, some people had his scissors likewise. When he put his head out of the shop door to see what sort of weather it was, he might have been mistaken for an Indian warrior with a very remarkable headdress. He had a short, disagreeable kind of unmirthful laugh, which came in all sorts of odd times when nobody else saw anything to laugh at all, and which sometimes made people start again, especially when they were being shaved, and Sweeney Todd would stop short in that operation to indulge in one of those cachinnatory effusions. It was evident that the remembrance of some very strange and out-of-the-way joke must occasionally flit across him, and then he gave this hyena-like laugh, but it was so short and so sudden, striking upon the ear for a moment and then gone, that people have been known to look up to the ceiling and on the floor and all round them to know from whence it had come, scarcely supposing it possible that it proceeded from mortal lips. Mr. Todd squinted a little to add to his charms, and so we think that by this time the reader may, in his mind's eye, see the individual whom we wish to present to him. Some thought him careless enough, a harmless fellow, with not much sense in him, and at times they almost considered he was a little cracked. But there were others who shook their heads when they spoke of him, and while they could say nothing to his prejudice, except that he certainly considered he was odd, yet when they came to consider what a great crime and misdemeanor it really is in this world to be odd, we shall not be surprised at the ill odor in which Sweeney Todd was held. But for all that, he did a most thriving business, and considered by his neighbors to be a very well-to-do sort of man, and decidedly, in city phraseology, warm. It was so handy for the young students in the temple to pop over to Sweeney Todd's to get their chins new rasped, so that from morning to night he drove a good business, and was evidently a thriving man. There was only one thing that seemed in any way to detract from the great prudence of Sweeney Todd's character,
and that was that he rented a large house, of which he occupied nothing but the shop and parlor, leaving the upper part entirely useless, and obstinately refusing to let it on any terms whatever. Such was the state of things in 1785 as regarded Sweeney Todd. The day is drawing to a close, and a small drizzling kind of rain is falling, so that there are not many passengers in the streets. And Sweeney Todd is sitting in his shop looking keenly in the face of a boy who stands in an attitude of trembling subjection before him. "You will remember," said Sweeney Todd, and gave his countenance a most horrible twist as he spoke. "You will remember Tobias Ragg, that you have of me had board, washing, and lodging, with the exception that you don't sleep here, that you take your meals at home, and that your mother, Mrs. Ragg, does your washing, which she may very well do, being a laundress in the Temple, and making no end of money. As for lodging, you lodge here, you know, very comfortably in the shop all day. Now, are you not a happy dog?" "Yes, sir," said the boy timidly. "You will acquire a first-rate profession, quite as good as the law, which your mother tells me she would have put you to, only that a little weakness of the headpiece unqualified you. And now, Tobias, listen to me, and treasure up every word I say." "Yes, sir." "I'll cut your throat ear from ear if you repeat one word that passes in this shop, or dare to make any supposition, or draw any conclusion from anything you may see, or hear, or fancy you see or hear. Now understand me. I'll cut your throat from ear to ear. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir. I won't say anything. I wish, sir, as I may be made into veal pies at Lovett's and Bell Yard, if I as much says a word." Sweeney Todd rose from his seat, and opening his huge mouth, he looked at the boy for a minute or two in silence, as if he fully intended swallowing him, but had not quite made up his mind where to begin. "Very good," at length he said. "I am satisfied. I am quite satisfied. And mark me, the shop, and the shop only, is your place." "Yes, sir." "And if any customer gives you a penny, you can keep it, so that if you get enough of them, you'll become a rich man. Only I will take care of them for you. And when I think you want them, I will let you have them. Run out and see what's o'clock by St. Dunstan's." There was a small crowd collected opposite the church, where the figures were about to strike 6:15, and among that crowd was one man who gazed with as much curiosity as anybody at the exhibition. "Now for it," he said. "They are going to begin. Well, that is ingenious. Look at the fellow lifting up his club, and down it comes, bang upon the old bell." The 3/4 were struck by the figures, and then the people who had loitered to see it done, many of whom had day by day looked at the same exhibition for years past, walked away with the exception of the man who seemed so deeply interested. He remained, and crouching at his feet was a noble-looking dog, who looked likewise up at the figures, and who, observing his master's attention to be closely fixed upon them, endeavored to show as great an appearance of interest as he possibly could. "What do you think of that, Hector?" said the man. The dog gave a sort of low, short whine, and then his master proceeded. "There's a barber shop opposite, so before I go any further, as I've got to see the ladies, although it's on a very melancholy errand, for I've got to tell them that poor Mark Ingustry is no more, and heaven knows what poor Joanna will say. I think I should know her by his description of her. Poor fellow. It grieves me to think how he used to talk about her in the long night watches, when all was still, and not a breath of air touched a curl upon his cheek. I can almost think I saw her sometimes, as he used to tell me of her soft, open, beaming eyes, her little, gentle, pouting lips, and the dimples that played about her mouth. Well, well, it's of no use grieving. He is dead and gone, poor fellow, and the salt water washes over as brave a heart as ever beat. His sweetheart, Joanna, though, she'll have a string of pearls for all that, and if she cannot be Mark Ingistry's wife in this world, she shall be rich and happy. Poor young thing, while she stays in it. That is to say, as happy as she can be. And she must look forward to meeting him aloft, where there are no squalls or tempests. And so I'll go and get shaved at once. He crossed the road toward Sweeney Todd's shop, and stepping down the low doorway, he stood face to face with the odd-looking barber. The dog gave a low growl and sniffed the air. "Why, Hector," said his master. "What's the matter?" "Down, sir, down." "I have a mortal fear of dogs," said Sweeney Todd. "Would you mind him, sir, sitting outside the door and waiting for you, if it's all the same? Only look at him. He's going to fly at me." "Then you are the first person he ever touched without provocation," said the man. "But I suppose he don't like your looks. And I must confess, I am much surprised at that. I've seen a few rum-looking guys in my time, but hang me if I ever saw such a figurehead as yours. What the devil noise was that?" "It was only me," said Sweeney Todd. "I laughed." "Laughed? Do you call that a laugh? I suppose you caught it of somebody who died of it. If that's your way of laughing, I beg you won't do it any more. Stop the dog. Stop the dog. I can't have dogs running into my back parlor." "Here, Hector, here," cried his master. "Get out." Most unwillingly, the dog left the shop and crouched down close to the outer door, which the barber took care to close, muttering something about a draught of air coming in. And then, turning to the apprentice boy, who was screwed up in a corner, he said, "Tobias, my lad, go to Leadenhall Street and bring a small bag of the thick biscuits from Mr. Peterson's. Say they are for me. Now, sir, I suppose you want to be shaved, and it is well you have come here, for there ain't a shaving shop, although I say it, in the city of London that ever thinks of polishing anybody off as I do. I tell you what it is, Master Barber, if you come that laugh again, I will get up and go. I don't like it, and there's an end of it." "Very good," said Sweeney Todd, as he mixed up a lather. "Who are you? Where'd you come from? And where are you going?" "That's cool, at all events. Damn it. What do you mean by putting the brush in my mouth? Now, don't laugh, and since you are so fond of asking questions, just answer me one." "Oh, yes, of course. What is it, sir?" "Do you know a Mr. Oakley, who lives somewhere in London and is a spectacle maker?" "Yes, to be sure I do. John Oakley, the spectacle maker, in Fore Street, and he's got a daughter named Joanna, that the young bloods call the flower of Fore Street." "Ah, poor thing. Do they? Now confound you. What are you laughing at now? What do you mean by it?" "Didn't you say, 'Ah, poor thing'? Just turn your head a little to one side, that will do. You have been to sea, sir?" "Yes, I have, and have only now lately come up the river from a voyage." "Indeed? Where can my strop be? I had it this minute. I must have laid it down somewhere. What an odd thing that I can't see it. It's very extraordinary. What can have become of it?" "Oh, I recollect. I took it into the parlor. Sit still, sir. I shall not be gone a moment. Sit still, sir, if you please. By and by, you can amuse yourself with the courier, sir, for a moment." Sweeney Todd walked into the back parlor and closed the door. There was a strange sound suddenly, compounded of a rushing noise and then a heavy blow, immediately after which Sweeney Todd emerged from his parlor, and folding his arms, he looked upon the vacant chair where his customer had been seated, but the customer was gone, leaving not the slightest trace of his presence behind, except his hat, and that Sweeney Todd immediately seized and thrust into a cupboard that was at one corner of the shop. "What's that?" he said. "What's that? I thought I heard a noise." "If you please, sir, I forgot the money, and I've run all the way back from St. Paul's churchyard." In 2 strides, Todd reached him, and clutching him by the arm, he dragged him into the farther corner of the shop, and then he stood opposite to him, glaring him full in the face with such a demonic expression that the boy was frightfully terrified. "Speak," cried Todd. "Speak, and speak the truth, or your last hour has come. How long were you peeping through the door before you came in?" "Peeping, sir?" "Yes, peeping. Don't repeat my words, but answer me at once. You will find it better for you in the end." "I wasn't peeping, sir, at all." Sweeney Todd drew a long breath as he then said, in a strange, shrieking sort of manner, which he intended, no doubt, should be jocose. "Well, well, very well. If you did peep, what then? It's no matter. I only wanted to know, that's all. It was quite a joke, wasn't it? Quite funny, though rather odd, eh? Why don't you laugh, you dog? Come now, there is no harm done. Tell me what you thought about it at once, and we will be merry over it, very merry." "I don't know what you mean, sir," said the boy, who was quite as much alarmed at Mr. Todd's mirth as he was at his anger. "I don't know what you mean, sir. I only just come back because I hadn't any money to pay for the biscuits at Peterson's." "I mean nothing at all," said Todd, suddenly turning upon his heel. "What's that scratching at the door?" Tobias opened the shop door, and there stood the dog, who looked wistfully round the place, and then gave a howl, which seriously alarmed the barber. "It's the gentleman's dog, sir," said Tobias. "It's the gentleman's dog, sir, that was looking at St. Dunstan's clock and came in here to be shaved. It's funny, ain't it, sir, that the dog didn't go away with his master?" "Why don't you laugh if it's funny?" "Turn out the dog, Tobias. We'll have no dogs here. I hate the sight of them. Turn him out. Turn him out." "I would, sir, in a minute, but I'm afraid he wouldn't let me, somehow. Only look, sir, look. See what he is now. Did you ever see such a violent fellow, sir? Why, he will have down the cupboard door." Stop him, stop him. The devil is in the animal. Stop him, I say." The dog was certainly getting the door open when Sweeney Todd rushed forward to stop him, but that he was soon admonished of the danger of doing, for the dog gave him a grip of the leg, which made him give such a howl that he precipitately retreated and left the animal to do its pleasure. This consisted in forcing open the cupboard door and seizing upon the hat which Sweeney Todd had thrust therein, and dashing out of the shop with it in triumph. "The devil's in the beast," muttered Todd. "He's off. Tobias, you said you saw the man who owned that fiend of a cur looking at St. Dunstan's church?" "Yes, sir, I did see him here. If you recollect, you sent me to see the time, and the figures were just going to strike 6:15, and before I came away, I heard him say that Mark Ingastry was dead, and Joanna should have the string of pearls. Then I came in, and then, if you recollect, sir, he came in,
And the odd thing, to me, is that he didn't take his dog with him. Because, sir. Because what? Shouted Todd. Because people generally do take their dogs with them, if you know, sir. And may I be made into one of Lovett's pies if I don't. Hush. Someone comes. It's old Mr. Grant from the temple. How do you do, Mr. Grant? I'm glad to see you looking so well, sir. It does one's heart to see a gentleman of your years looking so fresh and hearty. Sit down, sir. A little this way, if you please. Shaved, I suppose? Yes, Todd. Any news? No, sir. Nothing stirring. Everything very quiet, sir, except the high wind. They say it blew the king's hat off yesterday, sir, and he borrowed Lord North's. Trade is dull, too, sir. I suppose people won't come out to be cleaned and dressed in the mizzling rain. We haven't had anybody in the shop for an hour and a half. Lord, sir, said Tobias, you forget the seafaring gentleman with the dog, sir. Ah, so I do, said Todd. He went away. I saw him get into some disturbance, I think, just at the corner of the market. I wonder I didn't meet him, sir, said Tobias, for I came that way, and it's so very odd leaving his dog behind him. Yes, very, said Todd. Will you excuse me a moment, Mr. Grant? Tobias, my lad, I just want you to lend me a hand in the parlor. Tobias followed Todd very unsuspectingly into the parlor, but when they got there and the door was closed, the barber sprang upon him like an enraged tiger, and grappling him by the throat, he gave his head such a succession of knocks against the wainscot that Mr. Graham must have thought that some carpenter was at work. Then he tore a handful of his hair out, after which he twisted him around and dealt him such a kick that he was flung sprawling into a corner of the room. And then, without a word, the barber walked out again to his customer and bolted his parlor door on the outside, leaving Tobias to digest the usage he had received at his leisure and in the best way he could. When he came back to Mr. Graham, he apologized for keeping him waiting by saying, "It became necessary, sir, to teach my new apprentice a little bit of his business. I have left him studying it now. There's nothing like teaching young folks at once." "Ah," said Mr. Grant with a sigh, "I know what it is to let young folks grow wild. For although I have neither chick nor child of my own, I had a sister's son to look to, a handsome, wild, harum-scarum sort of fellow, as like me as one pea is like another. I tried to make a lawyer of him, but it wouldn't do. And it's now more than 2 years ago he left me altogether, and yet there was some good traits about Mark." "Mark, sir? Did you say Mark?" "Yes, that was his name. Mark Ingistry. God knows what's become of him." "Oh," said Sweeney Todd. He went on lathering the chin of Mr. Grant. Chapter 2. The Spectacle Maker's Daughter. "Joanna, Joanna, my dear, do you know what time it is?" "Joanna, I say, my dear, are you going to get up? Here's your mother has trotted out to Parson Lupin's, and you know that I have got to do Alderman Judd's house in Cripplegate the first thing, and I haven't had a morsel of breakfast yet. Joanna, my dear, do you hear me?" These observations were made by Mr. Oakley, the spectacle maker, at the door of his daughter Joanna's chamber, on the morning after the events we have just recorded at Sweeney Todd's. And presently, a sweet, soft voice answered him, saying, "I am coming, father, I am coming. In a moment, father, I shall be down." "Don't hurry yourself, my darling. I can wait." The little old spectacle maker descended the staircase again, and sat down in the parlor at the back of the shop,
where in a few moments he was joined by Joanna, his only and much-loved child. She was indeed a creature of the rarest grace and beauty. Her age was 18, but she looked rather younger, and upon her face she had that sweetness and intelligence of expression which almost bids defiance to the march of time. Her hair was of a glossy blackness, and what was rare in conjunction with such a feature, her eyes were of a deep and heavenly blue. There was nothing of the commanding or of the severe style of beauty about her, but the expression of her face was all grace and sweetness. It was one of those countenances which one could look at for a long summer's day, as upon the pages of some deeply interesting volume, which furnished the most abundant food for pleasant and delightful reflection. There was a touch of sadness about her voice, which perhaps only tended to make it the more musical, although mournfully so, and which seemed to indicate that at the bottom of her heart there lay some grief which had not yet been spoken, some cherished aspiration of her pure soul, which looked hopeless as regards completion, some remembrance of a former joy which had been so turned to bitterness and grief. It was the cloud in the sunny sky, the shadow through which there still gleamed bright and beautiful sunshine, but which still proclaimed its presence. "I have kept you waiting, Father," she said, as she flung her arms about the old man's neck. "I have kept you waiting." "Never mind, my dear, never mind. Your mother is so taken up with Mr. Lupin that, you know, this being Wednesday morning, she is off to his prayer meeting, and so I have had no breakfast, and really I think I must discharge Sam." "Indeed, Father, what has he done?" "Nothing at all, and that's my very reason. I had to take down the shutters myself this morning, and what do you think for? He had the coolness to tell me he couldn't take down the shutters this morning to sweep out the shop because his aunt had a toothache." "A poor excuse, Father," said Joanna, as she bustled about and got breakfast ready. "A very poor excuse. Poor indeed. But this month is up today, and I must get rid of him. But I suppose I shall have no end to bother with your mother, because his aunt belongs to Mr. Lupin's congregation. But as sure as this is the 20th day of August." "It is the 20th day of August," said Joanna, as she shrunk into a chair and burst into tears. It is. I thought I could have controlled this, but I cannot, Father. It was that which made me late. I knew Mother was out. I knew that I ought to be down, attending upon you, but I was praying for heaven to strength to do so, because this was the 20th of August. Joanna spoke these words incoherently, and amid sobs, and when she had finished them, she leaned her sweet face upon her small hands, and wept like a child. The astonishment, not unmingled with positive dismay, of the old spectacle maker was vividly depicted on his countenance, and for some minutes he sat perfectly aghast, with his hands resting on his knees, and looking in the face of his beautiful child, that is to say, as much as he could see of it between the little taper fingers that were spread upon it, as if he were newly awakened from some dream. "Good God, Joanna," he said at length, "what is this? My dear child, what has happened? Tell me, my dear, unless you wish to kill me with grief." "You shall know, Father," she said. "I did not think to say a word about it, but considered I had strength enough to mind to keep my sorrows in my own breast. But the effort has been too much for me, and I have been compelled to yield. If you had not looked so kindly on me, if I did not know that you love me as much as you do, I should easily have kept my secret, but knowing that much, I cannot." "My darling," said the old man, "you are right there. I do love you. What would the world be to me without you? There was a time 20 years ago when your mother made up much of my happiness, But of late, what with Mr. Lupin, and psalm singing and tea drinking, I see very little of her, and what little I do is not very satisfactory. Tell me, darling, what it is that vexes you, and I'll put it to rights. I don't belong to the city train bands for nothing. Father, I know that your affection would do all for me that it is possible to do, but you cannot recall the dead to life. And if this day passes over and I see him not, nor hear from him, I know that, instead of finding a home for me whom he loved, he has in the effort to do so found a grave for himself. He said he would. He said he would. Here she wrung her hands and wept again, and with such a bitterness of anguish that the old spectacle maker was at his wit's end, and knew not what on earth to say. My dear, he cried. Who is he? I hope you don't mean. Hush, Father, hush. I know the name that is hovering on your lips, but something seems even now to whisper to me he is no more. And being so, speak nothing of him, Father, but that which is good. You mean Mark Ingistry. I do, and if he had 1,000 faults, he at least loved me. He loved me truly and most sincerely. My dear, said the old spectacle maker, you know that I wouldn't for all the world say anything to vex you, nor will I. But tell me what it is that makes this day, more than any other, so gloomy to you. I will, Father. You shall hear. It was on this day 2 years ago that we last met. It was in this Temple garden, and he had just had a stormy interview with his uncle, Mr. Grant, and you will understand, Father, that Mark Ingistry was not to blame, because— Well, my dear, you needn't say anything more upon that point. Girls very seldom admit their lovers are to blame. But there are 2 ways, you know, Joanna, of telling a story. Yes, but Father, why should Mr. Grant seek to force him into the study of a profession he so much disliked? My dear, one would have thought that if Mark Ingistry really loved you, and found that he might make you his wife, and acquire an honorable subsistence for you and himself, that seems a very wonderful thing to me that he did not do so. You see, my dear, he should have liked you very well enough to do something else that he did not like. Yes, but Father, you know it is hard, when disagreements once arise for a young ardent spirit, to give in entirely. And so from one word, poor Mark, in his disputes with his uncle, got to another, when perhaps one touch of kindness or consolation from Mr. Grant would have made him quite pliant in his hands. Yes, that's the way, said Mr. Oakley. There's no end of the excuses. But go on, my dear, go on, and tell me exactly how this affair now stands. I will, Father. It was this day 2 years ago that we had met, and he told me that he and his uncle had at last quarreled irreconcilably, and that nothing could possibly now patch up the difference between them. We had a long talk. Ah, no doubt of that. And at length he told me that he must go and seek his fortune, that fortune which he hoped to share with me. He said that he had an opportunity of undertaking a voyage to India, and that if he were successful, he should have sufficient to return with, and commence some pursuit in London more congenial to his thoughts and habits than the law. Ah, well, what next? He told me that he loved me. Then you believed him? Father, you would have believed him had you heard him speak. His tones were those of such deep sincerity that no actor who ever charmed an audience with an unreal existence could have reached them. There are times and seasons when we know that we are listening to the majestic voice of truth, and there are tones which sink at once into the heart, carrying with them a conviction of their sincerity, which neither time nor circumstance can alter. and such were the tones in which Mark Ingistry spoke to me. And so you suppose, Joanna, that it is easy for a young man who has not patience or energy enough to be respectable at home to go abroad and make his fortune. Is idleness so much in request in other countries that it receives such a rich reward, my dear? You judge him harshly, father. You do not know him. Heaven forbid that I should judge anyone harshly, and I will freely admit that you know more of his real character than I can, who of course have only seen its surface. But go on, my dear, and tell me all. We made an agreement, father, that on that day 2 years he was to come to me or send me some news of his whereabouts. If I heard nothing of him, I was to conclude he was no more, and I could not help so concluding now. But the day has not yet passed. I know it has not, and yet I rest upon but a slender hope, father. Do you believe that dreams ever really shadow forth coming events? I cannot say, my child. I am not disposed to yield credence to any supposed fact because I have dreamt it. But I must confess to having heard some strange instances where these visions of the night have come strictly true. Heaven knows, but this may be one of them. I had a dream last night. I thought that I was sitting upon the seashore, and that all before me was nothing but a fathomless waste of waters. I heard the roar and the dash of the waves distinctly, and each moment the wind grew more furious and fierce. I saw in the distance a ship. It was battling the waves, which at one moment lifted it mountains high, and at another plunged it far down into such an abyss that not a vestige of it could be seen but the topmost spars of the tall mast. And still the storm increased each moment in its fury, and ever and anon there came a strange sullen sound across the waters, and I saw a flash of fire, and knew that those in the ill-fated vessel were thus endeavoring to attract attention and some friendly aid. Father, from the first to the last, I knew that Mark Ingistry was there. My heart told me so. I was certain he was there, and I was helpless, utterly and entirely unable to lend the slightest aid. I could only gaze upon what was going forward as a silent and terrified spectator of the scene. At last I heard a cry come over the deep, a strange, loud, wailing cry, which proclaimed to me the fate of the vessel. I saw its mast shiver for a moment in the blackened air, and then all was still for a few seconds, until there arose a strange, wild shriek. That I knew was the despairing cry of those who sank, never to rise again in that vessel. Oh, that was a frightful sound. It was a sound to linger on the ears, and haunt the memory of sleep. It was a sound never to be forgotten when once heard, but such as might again and again be remembered with horror and affright. And all this was in your dream? It was, father, it was. And you were helpless. I was, utterly and entirely helpless. It was very sad. It was, as you shall hear. The ship went down, and that cry that I had heard was the last despairing one given by those who clung to the wreck with scarce a hope, and yet because it was their only refuge, for where else had they to look for the smallest ray of consolation? Where else, save in the surging waters, were they to turn for safety? Nowhere. All was lost. All was despair. I tried to scream. I tried to cry aloud to heaven, to mercy upon those brave and gallant souls who had trusted their dearest possession, life itself, to the mercy of the deep. And while I so tried to render so inefficient succor, I saw a small speck in the sea, and my straining eyes perceived that it was a man floating and clinging to a piece of the wreck, and I knew it was Mark Ingistry. But my dear, surely you are not annoyed at a dream. It saddened me. I stretched out my arms to save him. I'd heard him pronounce my name and call upon me for help. 'Twas all in vain. He battled with the waves as long as human nature could battle with them. He could do no more, and I saw him disappear before my anxious eyes. Don't say you saw him, my dear. Say you fancy you saw him. It was such a fancy as I shall not lose the remembrance for many a day. Well, after all, my dear, it's only a dream, and it seems to me, without at all adverting to anything that should give you pain as regards to Mark Ingstry, that you made a very foolish bargain. For only consider how many difficulties might arise in the way of his keeping faith with you. You know I have your happiness so much at heart that, if Mark had been a worthy man and an industrious one, I should not have opposed myself to your union. But believe me, my dear Joanna, that a young man with great facilities for spending money and none whatever for earning any is just about the worst husband you could choose. And such a man was Mark Ingstry. But come, we will say nothing of this to your mother. Let the secret, if we may call it such, rest with me. And if you can inform me in what capacity and in what vessel he left England, I will not carry my prejudice so far against him as to hesitate about making what inquiry I can concerning his fate. I know nothing more, Father. We parted and never met again. Well, dry your eyes, Joanna, and as I go to Alderman Judd's, I'll think over the matter, which, after all, may not be so bad as you think. The lad is a good enough looking lad, and has, I believe, a good ability, if he would put it to some useful purpose. But if he goes scamping around the world in an unsettled manner, you are well rid of him. And as for his being dead, you must not conclude that by any means, for somehow or another, like a bad penny, those fellows always come back. There was more consolation in the kindly tone of the spectacle maker than the words he used. But upon the whole, Joanna was well enough pleased that she had communicated the secret of her father, for now, at all events, she had someone to whom she could mention the name of Mark Ingstry, without the necessity of concealing the sentiment with which she did so. And when her father had gone, she felt that, by more relation of it to him, some of the terrors of her dream had vanished. She sat for some time in a pleasing reverie, till she was interrupted by Sam, the shop boy, who came into the parlor and said, "Please, Miss Joanna, suppose I was to go down to the docks and try to find out for you Mr. Mark Ingstry. I say, suppose I was to do that. I heard it all, and if I do find him, I'll soon settle him." "What do you mean?" "It means that I won't stand it. Didn't I tell you, more than 3 weeks ago, as you was the object of my infections? Didn't I tell you that when my aunt died, I should come in for the soap and candle business and make you my missus?" The only reply which Joanna gave to this was to rise and leave the room, for her heart was too full of grief and sad speculation to enable her to do now, as she had often been in the habit of doing, viz., laugh at Sam's protestations of affection. So he was left to chew the cud of sweet and bitter fancy by himself. "A thousand damns," said he, when he entered the shop. "I always suspected there was some other fellow, and now I know it, I am ready to gnaw my head off that I ever consented to come here. Confound him. I hope he is at the bottom of the sea, and eat up by this time. Oh, I should like to smash everybody. If I had had my way, I'd just walk into society at large, as they calls it, and let it know what 1, 2, 3 slap in the eye is, and down it would go." Mr. Sam, in his rage, did upset a case of spectacles, which went down with a tremendous crash, and which,
however good imitation of the manner in which the society at large was to be knocked down, was not likely to be at all pleasing to Mr. Oakley. "I've done it now," he said. "But never mind. I'll try the old dodge whenever I break anything. That is, I'll place it in old Oakley's way, and swear he did it. I never knew such an old goose. You may persuade him into anything. The idea, now, of pulling down all the shutters this morning because I told him my aunt had the toothache, that was a go, to be sure. But I'll be revenged of that fellow who has took away, I consider, Joanna from me. I'll let him know what a blighted heart is capable of. He won't live long enough to want a pair of spectacles, I'll be bound, or else my name ain't Sam Bolt."
Hey, my name's Otis Gray, and you're listening to Sleepy. A podcast where I read old books to help you get to sleep. And this is a spooky midweek bedtime story for you. Well, it is about that time of year that I thoroughly enjoy, which is bringing you some spooky bedtime stories. It is officially October. Tonight is a brand new spooky story by Rudyard Kipling, author of The Jungle Book. So I think you're really going to like this. And before we get to this bedtime reading, I just want to thank all of our patrons on patreon.com, which is a website where you can go and pledge a couple bucks for an ad-free version of Sleepy. I know $1 or $2 might not seem a lot to you if you are a patron, but wow, does it make a difference to me. And it really just, it means a lot that you are so active in your appreciation for Sleepy. I really hope that you feel that it's reciprocated, because I love reading these stories for you. Clearly this show is part of your nightly routine, and I want it to keep being that. So I'll keep bringing you new stories as long as I am physically able. So if you're a patron of the show, thank you so much. You help this show keep going, and I really appreciate it. And if you are listening and you're not a patron, you can be if you'd like. You can go to patreon.com/sleepyradio, and even if you donate $1, I'll read your name in the opening credits of our next Sunday show after you do. So again, if you want to be a part of making this show, then just go to patreon.com/sleepyradio. Means a lot. Thank you. And as always, the music you're hearing is by my good friend James Lepkowski, and the cover art for Sleepy is by Gracie Kanan. Well, it is spooky October. Not only that, but you're going to be hearing this on October 2nd. And October 2nd, if you're a longtime listener of the show, I don't usually talk about myself a whole lot in the introductions to these shows, these bedtime stories. But I do like to say every year on October 2nd for now the last 4 years that this is my sober anniversary. This is my tomorrow. I'm recording this on Tuesday, October 1st. So tomorrow is my 4 years sober, and it's been a wild ride, and I could not imagine having a more wondrous life, honestly. It's really special, everything that has come with doing this for myself, and the only reason I say it out loud is because I think it's important for other people to hear who might be struggling like I was. I just didn't feel like I knew a lot of people who I identified with who had issues with addiction, and yeah, it was just nice to know that other people had similar struggles and, more importantly, found a way out and could live with this crazy thing. And yeah, so that's the only reason I really say it on this show. A, to congratulate myself, which is kind of hard for me to do sometimes, but also just to to let you know that if you are listening and you struggle with any sort of like substance addiction, there is a way out, and there's a lot of people like you. And life can be pretty extraordinary without it. You absolutely can be free of that. I did not think that I could be, and I am. It's pretty amazing. So yeah, congratulations to me, and congratulations to anyone listening who takes care of themselves. And I know from talking to some of you that you have a lot of sober, sleepy listeners. Congratulations to you. It's an honor to be in your company, and it's an honor to be bringing you a sleepy episode on this exact day. I'm really glad that the publishing day landed on my anniversary. So thank you all so much who have been along for this whole ride. I really appreciate you. Okay, that is enough of me yapping. Without further ado, the first spooky story of this October season, My Own True Ghost Story by Rudyard Kipling. And now is the time for you to fluff up your pillow just how you like it. Feel yourself melt into your bed. Get real comfortable. Close your eyes and let me read to you. My Own True Ghost Story. As I came through the desert, thus it was, as I came through the desert, the city of dreadful night. Somewhere in the other world, where there are books and pictures and plays and shop windows to look at, and thousands of men who spend their lives in building up all four, lives a gentleman who writes real stories about the real insides of people, and his name is Mr. Walter Besant. But he will insist upon treating his ghosts, he has published half a workshop full of them, with levity. He makes his ghost seers talk familiarity, and in some cases flirt outrageously with the phantoms. You may treat anything, from a victory to a vernacular paper, with levity, but you must behave reverently toward a ghost, and particularly an Indian one. There are, in this land, ghosts who take the form of fat, cold, pobby corpses and hide in trees near the roadside till a traveler passes. Then they drop upon his neck and remain. There are also terrible ghosts of women. These wander along the pathways at dusk or hide in crops near a village and call seductively. But to answer their call is death in this world and the next. Their feet are turned backward that all sober men may recognize them. There are ghosts of children. These haunt well curbs and fringes of jungles and wail under the stars, or catch women by the wrist and beg to be taken up and carried. These and the corpse ghosts, however, are only vernacular articles and do not attack sahibs. Nearly every other station owns a ghost. There are said to be 2 at Simla, not counting the woman who blows the bellows at Siri Dak Bungalow at the old road. Missouri has a house haunted of a very lively thing. A white lady is supposed to do night watchman round house in Lahore. DeLucy says that one of her houses repeats on autumn evenings all the incidents of a horrible horse and precipice accident. Marie has a ghost. and now that she has been swept by cholera, will have room for a sorrowful one. There are officers' quarters in the Myanmar whose doors open without reason, and whose furniture is guaranteed to creak, not with the heat of June, but with the weight of invisibles who come to lounge in the chairs. Peshawar possesses houses that none will willingly rent, and there is something, not fever, wrong with a bungalow in Allahabad. The older provinces simply bristle with haunted houses and march phantom armies along the main thoroughfares. Some of the dak bungalows on the Grand Trunk Road have handy little cemeteries in their compound, witnesses to the changes and chances of this mortal life in the days when men drove from Calcutta to the northwest. These bungalows are objectionable places to put up in. They are generally very old, always dirty, while the khansama is as ancient as the bungalow. He either chatters senilely or falls into the long trances of rage. In both moods he is useless. If you get angry with him, he refers to some Sahib dead and buried there 30 years and says that when he was in that Sahib's service, not a khansama in the province could touch him. Then he jabbers and mows and trembles and fidgets among the dishes, and you repent of your irritation. In these dak bungalows, ghosts are most likely to be found, and when found they should be made a note of. Not long ago it was my business to live in dak bungalows. I never inhabited the same house for 3 nights running, and grew to be learned in the surroundings. I lived in government-built ones, with red brick walls and rail ceilings, an inventory of the furniture posted in every room, and an excited snake at the threshold to give welcome. I lived in converted ones, old houses officiating as dak bungalows, where nothing was in its proper place and there wasn't even a fowl for dinner. I lived in second-hand palaces where the wind blew through the open-work marble tracery just as uncomfortably as through a broken pane. I lived in dak bungalows where the last entry in the visitor's book was 15 months old and where a little boy servant had died. It was my good luck to meet all sorts of men, from sober traveling missionaries and deserters flying from British regiments to drunken loafers who threw whiskey bottles at all who passed, and my still greater good fortune just to escape a maternity case. Seeing that a fair proportion of the tragedy of our lives out here acted itself in dak bungalows, I wondered that I had met no ghosts. A ghost that would voluntarily hang about the dak bungalow would be mad, of course, but so many men have died mad in dak bungalows that there must be a fair percentage of lunatic ghosts. In due time, I found my ghosts, or ghosts rather, for there were 2 of them. Up till that hour, I had sympathized with Mr. Besant's method of handling them, as shown in The Strange Case of Mr. Lucraft and Other Stories. I am now in the opposition. We will call the bungalow Katmal Dak Bungalow, but that was the smallest part of the horror. A man with a sensitive hide has no right to sleep in dak bungalows. He should marry. Katmal Dak Bungalow was old and rotten and unrepaired. The floor was of worn brick, the walls were filthy, and the windows were nearly black with grime. It stood on a bypath largely used by native sub-deputy assistants of all kinds, from finance to forests, but real sahibs were rare. The khansamah, who was nearly bent double with old age, said so. When I arrived, there was a fitful, undecided rain on the face of the land, accompanied by a restless wind, and every gust made a noise like the rattling of dry bones in the stiff toddy palms outside. The consummate completely lost his head on my arrival. He had served the Sahib once. Did I know that Sahib? He gave me the name of a well-known man who has been buried for more than a quarter of a century, and showed me an ancient daguerreotype of that man in his prehistoric youth. I had seen a steel engraving of him at the head of the double volume of memoirs a month before, and I felt ancient beyond telling. The day shut in, and the khansamah went to get me food. He did not go through the pretense of calling it khana, man's victuals. He said ratu, and that means, among other things, grub, dog's rations. There was no insult in his choice of the term. He had forgotten the other word, I suppose. While he was cutting up the animals, I settled myself down after exploring the dak bungalow. There were 3 rooms beside my own, which was a corner kennel, each giving into the other through dingy white doors fastened with long iron bars. The bungalow was a very solid one, but the partition walls of the rooms were almost jerry-built in their flimsiness. Every step or bang of a trunk echoed from my room down the other 3, and every footfall came back tremulously from the far walls. For this reason I shut the door. There were no lamps, only candles in the long glass shades. An oil wick was set in the bathroom. For bleak, unadulterated misery, that dak bungalow was the worst of the many that I'd ever set foot in. There was no fireplace, and the windows would not open, so a brazier of charcoal would have been useless. The rain and the wind splashed and gurgled and moaned round the house, and the toddy palms rattled and roared. 6 jackals went through the compound singing, and a hyena stood afar off and mocked them. A hyena would convince the Sadducee of the resurrection of the dead, the worst sort of dead. Then came the ratu, a curious meal, half native and half English in composition, with the old consummate babbling behind my chair about dead and gone English people, and the wind-blown candles playing shadow bo-peep with the bed and the mosquito curtains. It was just the sort of dinner and evening to make a man think of every single one of his past sins, and of all the others that he intended to commit if he lived. Sleep, for several hundred reasons, was not easy. The lamp in the bathroom threw the most absurd shadows into the room, and the wind was beginning to talk nonsense. Just when the reasons were drowsy and blood-sucking, I heard the regular, "Let us take and heave him over," grunt of the dooli bearers in the compound. First one dooli came in, then a second, and then a third. I heard the doolies dumped on the ground, and the shutter in front of my door shook. "That's someone trying to come in," I said. But no one spoke, and I persuaded myself that it was a gusty wind. The shutter of the room next to mine was attacked, flung back, and the inner door opened. "That's some sub-deputy assistant," I said, "and he has brought his friends with him. Now they'll talk and spit and smoke for an hour." But there were no voices and no footsteps. No one was putting his luggage into the next room. The door shut, and I thanked Providence that I was to be left in peace. But I was curious to know where the doolies had gone. I got out of bed and looked into the darkness. There was never a sign of a dooli. Just as I was getting into bed again, I heard in the next room the sound that no man in his senses can possibly mistake. The whir of a billiard ball down the length of the slates when the striker is striking for a break. No other sound is like it. A minute afterwards, there was another whir, and I got into bed. I was not frightened. Indeed, I was not. I was very curious to know what had become of the Dooleys. I jumped into bed for that reason. Next minute, I heard the double click of a cannon, and my hair sat up. It is a mistake to say that hair stands up. The skin of the head tightens, and you can feel a faint, prickly bristling all over the scalp. That is the hair sitting up. There was a whir and a click, and both sounds could only have been made by one thing: a billiard ball. I argued the matter out at great length with myself, and the more I argued, the less probable it seemed that one bed, one table, and two chairs, all the furniture of the room next to mine, could so exactly duplicate the sounds of a game of billiards. After another cannon, a three-cushioned one to judge by the whir, I argued no more. I had found my ghost, and would have given worlds to have escaped from that dak bungalow. I listened, and with each listen the game grew clearer. There was whir on whir, and click on click. Sometimes there was a double click and a whir and another click. Beyond any sort of doubt, people were playing billiards in the next room, and the next room was not big enough to hold a billiard table. Between the pauses of the wind, I heard the game go forward, stroke after stroke. I tried to believe that I could not hear voices, but that attempt was a failure. Do you know what fear is? Not ordinary fear of insult, injury, or death, but abject, quivering dread of something that you cannot see. Fear that dries the inside of the mouth and half of the throat. Fear that makes you sweat on the palms of the hands and gulp in order to keep the uvula at work. This is a fine fear, a great cowardice, and must be felt to be appreciated. The very improbability of billiards in a dak bungalow proved the reality of the thing. No man, drunk or sober, could imagine a game at billiards, or invent the splitting crack of a screw cannon. A severe course of dak bungalows has this disadvantage: it breeds infinite credulity. If a man said to a confirmed dak bungalow haunter, "There's a corpse in the next room, and there's a mad girl in the next but one, and the woman and man on that camel have just eloped from a place 60 miles away," the hearer would not disbelieve, because he would know that nothing is too wild, grotesque, or horrible to happen in a dak bungalow. This credulity unfortunately extends to ghosts. A rational person fresh from his own house would have turned on his side and slept. I did not. So surely as I was given up as a bad carcass by the scores of things in the bed, because the bulk of my blood was in my heart, so surely did I hear every stroke of a long game at billiards playing in the echoing room behind the iron-barred door. My dominant fear was that the players might want a marker. It was an absurd fear, because creatures who could play in the dark would be above such superfluities. I only know that it was my terror, and it was real. After a long, long while, the game stopped, and the door banged. I slept because I was dead tired. Otherwise, I should have preferred to have kept awake. Not for everything in Asia would I have dropped the door bar and peered into the dark of the next room. When the morning came, I considered that I had done well and wisely, and inquired for the means of departure. "By the way, Consummate," I said, "what were those 3 Dooleys doing in my compound in the night?" "There were no Dooleys," said the Consummate. I went into the next room, and the daylight streamed through the open door. I was immensely brave. I would, at that hour, have played black pool with the owner of the big black pool down below. Has this place always been a dak bungalow? I asked. No, said the consummate. 10 or 20 years ago, I've forgotten how long. It was a billiard room. How much? A billiard room for the Sahibs who built the railway. I was consummate then, in the big house where all the railway Sahibs lived, and I used to come across with brandy shrap. These 3 rooms were all in one, and they held a big table on which the Sahibs played every evening. But the Sahibs are all dead now, and the railway runs, you say, nearly to Kabul. Do you remember anything about the Sahibs? It is long ago, but I remember that one Sahib, a fat man and always angry, was playing here one night, and he said to me, Mongol Khan, brandy, pani do. And I filled the glass. Then he bent over the table to strike, and his head fell lower and lower till it hit the table, and his spectacles came off. And when he, the Sahibs and I myself, ran to lift him, he was dead. I helped to carry him out. Ah, he was a strong Sahib. But he is dead, and I, old Mongol Khan, am still living by your favor. That was more than enough. I had my ghost, a first-hand authenticated article. I would write to the Society for Psychic Research. I would paralyze the empire with the news. But I would, first of all, put 80 miles of assessed cropland between myself and that dak bungalow before nightfall. The Society might send their regular agent to investigate later on. I went to my room and prepared to pack after noting down the facts of the case. As I smoked, I heard the game begin again, with a miss in the balk this time, for the war was a short one. The door was open, and I could see into the room. Click, click. That was a cannon. I entered the room without fear, for there was sunlight within and a fresh breeze without. The unseen game was going on at a tremendous rate, and well it might, when a restless little rat was running to and fro inside the dingy ceiling cloth, and a piece of loose window sash was making 50 breaks off the window bowl as it shook in the breeze. Impossible to mistake the sound of billiard balls. Impossible to mistake the whir of a ball over the slate. But I was to be excused. Even when I shut my enlightened eyes, the sound was marvelously like that of a fast game. Entered angrily the faithful partner of my sorrows, Ghadir Baksh. This bungalow is very bad and low caste. No wonder the presence was disturbed and is speckled. 3 sets of dually bearers came to the bungalow last night when I was sleeping outside and said it was their custom to rest in the rooms set apart for the English people. What honor has the consummate? They tried to enter, but I told them to go. No wonder, if these Urias had been here, that the presence is sorely spotted. It is shame, and the work of a dirty man. Ghadir Baksh did not say that he had taken from each gang 2 annas for rent in advance, and then, beyond my earshot, had beaten them with the big green umbrella whose use I could never before divine. But Ghadir Baksh has no notions of morality. There was an interview with the consummate, but as he promptly lost his head, wrath gave place to pity, and pity led to a long conversation, in the course of which he put the fat engineer Sahib's tragic death in 3 separate stations, 2 of them 50 miles away. The third shift was to Calcutta, and there the Sieve died while driving a dog car. If I had encouraged him, the Khansama would have wandered all through Bengal with his corpse. I did not go away as soon as I intended. I stayed for the night, while the wind and the rat in the sash in the window bowl played a ding-dong 150 up. Then the wind ran out, and the billiard stopped, and I felt that I had ruined my one genuine Hallmark ghost story. Had I only stopped at the proper time, I could have made anything out of it. That was the bitterest thought of all. Thank you for listening to Sleepy. Good night.